noticed some Christians, or more specifically evangelicals, going over to the dark side in the past 10 years or so? I'm not talking about the invite you to church on Sunday Christian, or the let's have a bake sale to raise money for our local school Christian, or even the Christian that offers to buy you your coffee at Starbucks. I'm talking about the angry Christians. The picket on the side of the road against this particular people group Christians. The always looking to get into an argument on Facebook Christians. The Christians who don't just vote, but make their political ideology their entire world and personality. I don't know about you, but I grew up in evangelical Christianity. And though it wasn't perfect, it's never been as toxic as it is now. And despite your views on Christianity, it may have you asking, why? What's changed that's caused these certain evangelicals to be so up in arms and so angry at everyone? And while I don't want to waste your time with an entire history lesson, I do think I may have pinpointed a solid reason why. If you go back to the origins of America, you'll find three particular groups of people who were in power. They were predominantly white, predominantly male, and predominantly Christian. And for most of US history, that's who's remained in power. We fought civil wars over it, there was a whole women's suffrage movement over it, and a civil rights movement over it, just to name a few. And if you look at all these major movements in American history, it was always to a certain extent a pushback against that power vacuum. And you might be watching this video thinking, hey, it's 2024, racism doesn't exist anymore, sexism doesn't exist anymore, and classism doesn't exist anymore. I feel pretty confident speaking for most Americans saying, it's probably not the case. But back to the evangelicals. Did you know that roughly 75% of evangelicals identify as white? Did you know that roughly 86% of evangelical pastors are white? Did you know that roughly 90% of evangelical pastors are men? Hopefully you see where I'm going with this. And just a fair warning here, this is a conspiracy theory alert, just in case you haven't heard enough of them this week. There's a far-right conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement Theory. You'll hear some far-right politicians openly talk about it, and others use more coded language to inform their voter base. The Great Replacement Theory, in short, basically just says that there is an intentional effort to replace the white people in this country with the people of color in this country, be it through immigration, legal or illegal, interracial couples, and any other way that makes our country less white. Now, on the surface, it might seem like I'm just talking about racism, and while that plays a part in it, I do think it has deeper roots. Remember how we talked about the evangelicals being predominantly white male-led? Also remember how America has historically been led by white Christian males. Here's where these two worlds collide and intertwine. And at its core, this is very basic human principles. Those with power create a vacuum and pass laws and legislation to benefit them. And as long as everybody in the country is okay with that, the status quo is left unbothered. But the moment that power vacuum is challenged, now there's fear. And even if you're just a little bit of a Star Wars fan, you know that
fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering.
So here's my theory in a nutshell. There are those in power in America who see the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, the demographics shifting to a more progressive and diverse culture. A culture shift who will most likely not overwhelmingly support white male Christians as their only option for power. Now, I could go on and on about how politicians are corrupt, but I'd really just be preaching to the choir. What I think we really need to look at is how the evangelical leaders in America have identified their power vacuum with the power vacuum of the politicians they support. There are far-right politicians right now on the news every day saying if you are white, Christian, or male, they are coming for you. So they use this to push religion in the public school system. They use this to push their immigration ideology. And if you're really paying attention, they're finding ways to weave this into every bit of policy they can. For those of you who know the basis of Project 2025, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I don't want to keep this just political. I do want to focus on the evangelicals. A Christian group who identifies as predominantly white and predominantly led by men have shifted their theology to identify with the ideology their political party is pushing. There are those evangelicals out there who cannot stomach the thought of non-white Christians setting the cultural tone for the country. In short, they don't want to lose power. So they'll find a way to preach flashy sermons and twist scripture into this new ideology.
You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. I don't care how mad that makes you. You get pissed off as you want to. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. They are God-denying demons.
But the big problem is that most evangelical Christians consume whatever their pastors and leaders tell them as truth. This is where the dissonance comes in today, where you have non-Christians looking at Christians saying, you guys don't look much like Jesus. The evangelical world doesn't look like it's for the least of those. The evangelical world doesn't look like love your neighbor. The evangelical world doesn't look like sharing a table with sinners. In fact, a lot of non-Christians look at the evangelicals not as an inclusive, loving group of people like Jesus commanded, but instead as an exclusive group of people who are only concerned with controlling the culture around them. This is the dark side of the evangelical world in 2024.